Act like you're mine and come with me," the lonely cowboy said to the Apache girl at station entranced. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty train station, painting everything in a warm, golden glow. The air was dry, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the distant sound of a horse's hooves. James, the cowboy, leaned against a wooden post, dust clinging to his worn boots and frayed coat. He had been waiting for hours, though the train was always late. Waiting was a familiar companion to him, quiet, patient, and sometimes lonely. But today, something felt different. He shifted his weight, brushing the dust off his coat, and squinted down the tracks. A light wind stirred, rattling the boards beneath his feet and sending a trail of sand across the platform. The station was small and almost empty, except for a few travelers sitting on benches, their bags at their sides. A child tugged at his mother's dress, asking questions too softly to hear over the creaking sign above that read, "San Pedro Station." James's eyes wandered automatically, scanning for the train. But then something, or someone, caught his attention. She was standing a few feet away, her presence both quiet and undeniable. She was young, no more than 20, with dark hair braided neatly down her back, eyes that seemed to hold a mixture of fear and curiosity, and skin kissed by the sun. She was clearly Apache, though she carried herself with a dignity that made her stand out in the crowd. Even from a distance, there was a sense of strength about her, as if she had faced hardships that most people could not even imagine. For a moment, James forgot the waiting, the heat, even the dust. His gaze met hers, and there was a flicker of something unspoken, loneliness recognized in another. Her eyes were cautious, measuring him silently, as if trying to decide whether he was friend or threat. James offered a small nod, almost apologetic, and returned to his leaning position, trying to look casual while his heart beat a little faster. The train whistle blew faintly in the distance, sending a shiver through the quiet afternoon. The girl shifted, moving closer to her family, a group of 3 who carried small bundles and a few blankets. They looked tired from the journey, their clothing worn from travel, but they were alert, wary of the other people waiting at the station. James noticed how she walked slightly apart from them, her steps careful, deliberate. There was a tension in her shoulders, a readiness to react, and he understood immediately that she had learned to protect herself. A group of rough-looking men entered the station, laughing and shouting loudly, their boots scuffing the wooden floor. They glanced at the girl and her family, and one of them made a comment under his breath. She stiffened, her hand brushing the strap of a small bag she carried. James stepped slightly forward instinctively, not sure why. He didn't know this girl, had never spoken to her, yet he felt a strange sense of responsibility, as if he had to make sure no harm came her way. The wind picked up, sending a swirl of dust across the platform. James rubbed his eyes and adjusted the brim of his hat, trying to stay calm. The girl glanced back at him, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked again. There was something in that look, a silent plea, perhaps, or maybe just recognition. James couldn't tell, but it was enough to make him aware of the emptiness that had followed him for years, the loneliness that he had wrapped himself around like a coat. Time passed slowly. The train still hadn't arrived. James noticed small details. The way her fingers traced the edge of her blanket, the way her eyes darted to the approaching men, the faint tension in her jaw. He wondered where she was going, why she was traveling alone with her family in such a harsh land, and whether she even wanted anyone to notice her. There was a story behind those eyes, a history he could not see but felt, pressing in the quiet air between them. He cleared his throat softly, almost unconsciously, and muttered to himself, "Train's late as usual." But it wasn't the train he was thinking about. It was her. She moved again, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and looked out toward the tracks as if expecting something. Or someone. James felt an odd mixture of curiosity and protectiveness. He didn't know why he cared so much, yet he could not tear his eyes away. The afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting a warm orange glow across the platform. Shadows stretched long and thin, making the world seem both larger and emptier at the same time. James adjusted his coat and shifted his weight, wondering how the girl could stand so still, so composed, in the middle of all this uncertainty. There was a quiet courage in her stance, and he found himself admiring it. Suddenly, one of the men from the rough group laughed loudly, drawing her attention. She stiffened again, her hand gripping her bag tighter. James felt a surge of instinctive anger, not toward her, but toward anyone who would make her feel threatened. He stepped a little closer, not too close, but enough that she might notice his presence. She did. Her eyes flicked toward him, and for a moment, he thought she might look away. But she didn't. She held his gaze steady, cautious, curious. The whistle of the train sounded again, closer this time, echoing across the empty plains beyond the station. The girl's family began to gather their belongings, preparing to board. She hesitated, glancing toward the tracks, then back at James. He noticed her hesitation, the tiny sign that she was considering her options, even briefly. He felt a strange hope rise in his chest, a hope that somehow their paths were meant to cross, even if only for a moment. James cleared his throat again, this time louder, and took a small step forward. "It's a long ride out here," he said, his voice steady but soft. The girl's eyes widened slightly, just enough to show that she had heard him, just enough to acknowledge his words without trusting them completely. She looked down at the ground, then back at him, measuring him silently. The train began to pull into the station, its wheels screeching against the rails. Dust rose into the air, mingling with the warm light of the late sun. The girl's family started moving toward the open doors of the train, and she followed, her steps still careful, still deliberate. James stayed where he was, leaning against the post, watching. He didn't move to stop her, not yet, but he felt the pull of fate, the invisible thread that seemed to connect them in the midst of all the noise and dust. As she stepped onto the train, their eyes met one last time, a silent understanding passing between them. There were no words, no promises, only a shared recognition of loneliness, courage, and the possibility of trust. James tipped his hat slightly, a small gesture of respect and acknowledgement. The train doors closed, and the whistle blew one final time as it began to move, carrying her away from the station, leaving James standing alone again. But even as he watched her disappear into the distance, James felt something shift inside him. The emptiness he had carried for so long was still there, but now it was joined by a spark of hope, a promise that life could still surprise him even in the quietest, loneliest places. And he knew, without fully understanding why, that their meeting at the station was only the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. The train moved slowly along the tracks, rattling and creaking under the weight of passengers and cargo. Inside one of the wooden cars, the Apache girl sat stiffly on a worn bench, her hands folded over a small bundle of belongings. Her dark eyes scanned the scenery rushing past the window. Dry plains dotted with sagebrush, distant hills, and the occasional cluster of trees. Everything seemed familiar, yet alien at the same time. She felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief because the station and its noisy crowd were behind her, unease because she had no clear destination and no one to truly trust. A memory of the cowboy at the station lingered in her mind. His presence had been quiet but steady, like a shadow that followed her without interfering. She could still see his hat tipped slightly, the dust clinging to his coat, and the way his eyes had held hers, not with threat, not with demand, but with something gentler. She didn't know why his image stayed with her, but she couldn't shake it. Meanwhile, outside the train, James rode slowly along the dusty road, following the station at a distance. He did not have a clear plan, only a strong instinct that he could not ignore. Something about the girl, about the way she carried herself, drew him forward. He rode carefully, staying out of sight for now, unsure if he was acting out of foolishness or genuine concern. Each turn of his horse's hooves against the hard ground brought him closer to a decision he had not yet fully formed in his mind. Back inside the train, the girl's family spoke in low voices, their words carrying concern and caution. They had traveled far to reach this stop, seeking safety and opportunity, but the world outside the train window seemed harsh and unwelcoming. She listened quietly, not interrupting, though her heart raced with every sound outside the car. Her senses were alert, trained to notice danger in any form, and she could feel the tension growing with each passing mile. The train slowed near a small, isolated crossing. Dust swirled in the wind, and a lone rider appeared on the horizon. The girl's heart skipped a beat, though she could not immediately explain why. The figure was distant, almost a shadow, but there was a certainty in the way he rode. Steady, deliberate, and calm, James kept a safe distance, letting the train move along before deciding whether to approach. He watched the girl, studying the careful way she held herself, the way her eyes flicked toward the horizon whenever she sensed something unusual. Suddenly, the train jolted over uneven tracks, and the girl's bundle slipped from her lap. She caught it just in time, her fingers brushing the edge of the wooden seat. Her heart pounded in her chest, but no one noticed, as most passengers were absorbed in their own journeys. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and glanced around. For a brief moment, she imagined what it would be like to step off the train, to be free from schedules, whistles, and the constant awareness of danger. The thought was both frightening and exhilarating. James watched from a distance, realizing that her moment of tension had revealed more about her than words ever could. She was cautious, yes, but capable. Strong, independent, and yet there was a softness in the way she reacted to sudden challenges, a sign of humanity that he recognized from himself. He wanted to speak to her, to offer reassurance, but he knew that words spoken too soon could scare her away. So he rode quietly, observing, waiting for the right moment. Hours passed as the train moved through the plains. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the land. Inside the car, the girl shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of anticipation pressing on her shoulders. She thought about the cowboy, about the strange pull she had felt at the station. It was confusing, even frightening. She had been taught to rely on her own strength, to trust her instincts, and yet there was something about him that sparked a flicker of hope, a hope she had almost forgotten existed. As night fell, the train slowed again, approaching a small, barely noticeable stop in the middle of nowhere. The whistle sounded faintly, echoing against the hills. The passengers stirred, preparing to disembark or simply stretch their legs. The girl's family gathered their belongings quickly, anxious to leave the train for a brief moment. She hesitated, her eyes scanning the darkened landscape. Something about the quiet night, the soft glow of lanterns, made her senses tingle. She could feel the presence of someone nearby, watching, waiting. James had ridden closer, under the cover of darkness. He kept his horse quiet, moving slowly so as not to startle anyone. He wanted to speak, to offer protection and guidance, but he did not want to frighten her. There was a delicate balance to maintain, a silent dance of distance and approach. He knew that trust could not be forced. It had to be earned. And in this moment, he felt the weight of that responsibility pressing on him. The girl noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. A shadow detached itself from the trees near the tracks, moving cautiously but deliberately. Her hand instinctively went to her bundle, her fingers tightening around it. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange sense of familiarity. The figure stepped into a shaft of moonlight, and she saw him clearly, the cowboy from the station. Her heart raced, but she did not panic. Instead, she measured him carefully, trying to understand his intentions. James dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements calm. "I don't mean any harm," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I only want to help. You don't have to go with me if you don't want to, but I can make sure you're safe." The girl's eyes narrowed slightly. She had been taught to be wary of strangers, to trust no one, yet there was an honesty in his tone she could not ignore. She weighed her options quickly. Staying with her family offered safety in numbers, but danger was never far behind. Taking a chance on this stranger was risky, but it might also be the only way to find a sense of freedom she had longed for. After a long pause, she nodded slightly, signaling that she would listen. It was not a full agreement, not yet, but a tentative step toward trust. James smiled faintly, relieved, and extended his hand, not to command, but to guide. She accepted it, her fingers brushing his briefly, and together they moved away from the train and the crowd, stepping into the cool night air. The journey began in silence, broken only by the soft sounds of the horses' hooves on the dirt and the distant cries of night birds. The girl rode cautiously, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. James kept a steady pace beside her, speaking occasionally in gentle tones to offer reassurance. He told her about the trails ahead, the small towns where travelers could find food and rest, and the quiet places where the world seemed at peace. With each mile, a fragile connection began to form between them. The girl's initial wariness softened, replaced by curiosity and a growing sense of comfort. James listened carefully to her words, not prying, simply offering presence and understanding. For the first time in many weeks, she allowed herself a small measure of trust, and for the first time in years, James felt the heavy weight of loneliness lighten, replaced by a quiet hope that perhaps, just perhaps, their paths had crossed for a reason. As the night deepened, the stars emerged in full brilliance, scattered across the sky like tiny points of light. The wind whispered through the grass and trees, carrying the scent of sage and earth. In that vast open world, the cowboy and the Apache girl rode together, two travelers bound by circumstance, by instinct, and by the slow, careful beginnings of trust. Neither knew what the future held, but in that moment, the journey itself was enough. The first light of dawn stretched across the plains, painting the world in shades of pink and gold. James and the Apache girl rode quietly, the horses' hooves kicking up small clouds of dust in the cool morning air. The night had been calm, but the journey was far from easy. Both were aware that the frontier was unpredictable. Wild animals, sudden storms, and the vast emptiness itself could be as dangerous as any enemy. Yet for the first time there was a sense of companionship, even if fragile and unspoken, between them. The girl had stayed quiet most of the night, her dark eyes scanning the horizon whenever the wind shifted or the grass whispered. James could see her tension, the careful way she held herself, and he respected it. He understood that she had learned to survive by paying attention to the smallest details, by noticing what others missed. He did not push her to speak. Instead, he rode alongside, offering calm presence and silent support. As the sun rose higher, the plains revealed themselves in all their beauty and challenge. Rolling hills stretched into the distance, punctuated by scattered trees and rocky outcrops. James led the horse along a narrow trail that wound through low brush, careful to keep the path safe and avoid hidden dangers. Every so often he glanced at the girl, noting the way she adjusted her posture, keeping her balance as the horse stumbled over uneven ground. She was careful, capable, and determined, not someone easily frightened or swayed. They paused briefly near a small stream that cut through the plain, the water glinting in the morning sun. James dismounted and handed the reins to the girl. "You can drink first," he said softly. "I'll watch the trail." She nodded, lowering herself carefully to the edge of the water. The cool liquid refreshed her, and she let herself relax just a little, feeling safe enough to breathe. The sound of flowing water, the chirping of distant birds, and the rustle of leaves created a moment of peace in the vast wilderness. As they continued, James shared small stories of his travels, tales of towns he had passed through, ranches he had worked on, and the kindness of strangers he had met along the way. The girl listened quietly, occasionally asking questions about a place or a person he mentioned. Her voice was soft, careful, and measured, but it carried curiosity, a curiosity that James welcomed. It reminded him that she was not only cautious, but also eager to understand the world beyond what she had known. By mid-morning, the trail became rougher. Rocks jutted out of the ground and the brush grew thicker. The girl's horse stumbled once, but she steadied it quickly, keeping her balance with skill that impressed James. "You're good at this," he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. She looked at him, her dark eyes meeting his for a moment. "I've had to learn," she replied quietly. There was no boast in her tone, only truth. James nodded, respecting her strength and independence. The quiet ride was interrupted by the sudden sound of movement in the distance, a rustling among the trees. Both James and the girl froze, their senses alert. Nothing appeared immediately, but the noise was enough to remind them that the frontier was full of unexpected dangers. James gestured for her to stay calm. "Probably just a deer," he said, though his own eyes scanned the area cautiously. The girl's hand tightened slightly on the reins, but she remained silent, letting him assess the situation. After a tense moment, the rustling stopped. Relief passed between them, unspoken but palpable. They continued on, but the encounter had reminded them both that the world outside the train station was vast, wild, and unpredictable. Every step forward required attention, patience, and care. And yet, they moved together, learning the rhythm of each other's presence, the silent understanding that sometimes words were unnecessary. By noon, they reached a small hill that overlooked a valley below. The sun was high and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and earth. They stopped to rest, letting the horse graze while they sat on a flat rock. James pulled a small bundle from his saddle, a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried meat. He offered some to the girl, who accepted politely. They ate quietly, sharing the meal without rushing, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. As they rested, the girl began to speak more freely, telling James about her family, their journey, and the places they had come from. She spoke of her people's traditions, their connection to the land, and the hardships they had endured. James listened with genuine interest, careful not to interrupt, knowing that trust was delicate and could not be forced. With each word, he learned more about her world, a world both different from and similar to his own. The afternoon brought new challenges. Dark clouds rolled in over the plains, and the wind began to pick up. James noticed the change immediately, the way the air felt heavy with the promise of rain. He urged the girl to keep moving, knowing that shelter would be necessary soon. They navigated the uneven terrain carefully, avoiding loose rocks and deep ruts, both aware that a sudden storm could make the journey dangerous. Rain began to fall lightly at first, a fine mist that made the dirt trail slippery. James and the girl found a small grove of trees to take shelter under. The branches offered some protection, but the rain was relentless, soaking their clothes and hair. The girl shivered slightly, and James offered his coat without hesitation. She accepted, draping it over her shoulders, grateful for the warmth and care. In that simple act, a deeper bond began to form, a bond of trust, respect, and shared experience. As the rain intensified, James spoke softly. "We'll find a town soon. There's always somewhere to rest and dry off." The girl nodded, her eyes reflecting both fatigue and a cautious hope. She had been alone in the wilderness before, but never with someone who seemed so genuinely concerned for her safety. It was a new feeling, one she was beginning to accept slowly. Nightfall brought a different set of challenges. The storm had passed, leaving the ground wet and muddy, and the air was cool and crisp. They rode carefully through the dark, guided by the faint glow of the moon. James kept the pace steady, ensuring that the horse did not stumble. The girl followed closely, her trust in him growing with each careful step. They spoke occasionally, sharing observations about the land, the weather, and the small signs of wildlife around them. By the time they reached a small, quiet settlement near the edge of the valley, both were exhausted but relieved. James helped the girl dismount, and together they led the horse to a stable. The innkeeper, a kind woman with a warm smile, welcomed them, offering a dry room and food. The girl looked around the inn cautiously, still alert, but comforted by the safety of the place. James arranged for a room for them both, careful to respect her independence while ensuring they had shelter. That evening, as they sat by the fire in the common room, sharing a simple meal, James reflected on the day. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also brought them closer. The girl's cautious nature had slowly given way to a tentative trust, and he had learned more about patience, empathy, and the strength of the human spirit. For the first time in years, he felt that companionship, quiet, steady, and real, was possible, even in a world as vast and unpredictable as the frontier. The girl looked at him across the table, a small smile forming on her lips. She had seen his kindness, his patience, and his respect, and it had not gone unnoticed. For the first time since leaving her family behind at the train station, she allowed herself a small measure of hope. A hope that the journey, difficult as it was, might also bring connection, safety, and understanding. As the night deepened and the inn grew quiet, both James and the girl understood that the frontier was still vast, and challenges would continue to arise. But for now, they had found a moment of peace, a brief respite from the uncertainties of the road. And in that moment, a bond was forming, fragile yet real, built on shared experience, mutual respect, and the quiet understanding that sometimes, even in the wildest places, human connection could be found. The morning air was crisp and clear, carrying the smell of damp earth from the rain the night before. James and the Apache girl prepared to leave the small settlement, the warmth of the inn fading behind them as they saddled the horse and adjusted their packs. There was a quiet determination between them now, a shared understanding that the journey ahead would not be easy, but that together they could face it. The girl's eyes scanned the horizon as they rode through the early mist. Even in the safety of the inn, she had learned that danger could appear without warning. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, was registered instinctively. James noticed her alertness, the subtle tension in her posture, and he admired her careful watchfulness. It reminded him that her strength was not only physical but also mental, a skill honed by necessity. They rode for hours, the landscape changing slowly from rolling plains to rocky hills. The wind carried a chill that made the morning sun feel weaker than it appeared. James spoke softly to break the silence, telling stories of his travels and sharing his thoughts about the land they were crossing. The girl listened carefully, occasionally asking questions about people he had met or towns he had visited. Her curiosity was quiet but genuine, and James found himself enjoying the company more than he expected. Suddenly, a movement in the distance caught their attention. A small group of riders approaching along a parallel trail. James slowed the horse, signaling for the girl to do the same. She tightened her grip on the reins, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the strangers. The riders were rough-looking, dust-covered, and their expressions unreadable. They rode with purpose, their horses moving steadily but not recklessly. James instinctively placed himself slightly ahead of the girl, a protective gesture he hoped would not frighten her. As the riders drew closer, one of them called out in a loud voice, asking if the travelers had seen anyone pass through recently. James responded calmly, keeping his tone neutral, and watched the girl for her reaction. She remained silent but alert, her eyes following every movement. The riders passed by without incident, continuing down their path, and a wave of relief passed through both James and the girl. It was a reminder that even small moments on the frontier could be tense, and that caution was always necessary. After the encounter, the girl spoke quietly. "They were looking for someone," she said. "I think it might be dangerous." James nodded, understanding her concern. "It's always wise to be careful," he replied. "We can't control what others do, but we can make choices to keep ourselves safe." The girl considered his words, a small measure of trust in his judgment beginning to grow. She realized that he was not only strong but also thoughtful, someone who could guide her through challenges without undermining her independence. As they continued, the trail became narrower and more difficult. Rocks jutted from the ground, and the horse stumbled once, forcing the girl to steady herself quickly. James gave her an approving glance. "You're handling this well," he said. She nodded, her face serious but composed. "I've had to learn," she replied simply. There was no boast, only truth. James respected her for it, realizing that her courage was matched by experience and that the journey would be demanding for both of them. By midday, the sun was high, and the heat made the ground hard and dry. They stopped briefly near a small creek to rest and let the horse drink. James handed the girl a piece of bread from his pack, and she accepted it with a small nod. They ate quietly, the sound of the water and the distant calls of birds creating a peaceful background. For a moment, the dangers of the trail seemed far away, and they could simply exist in the calm of the land. But peace was short-lived. As they rode on, dark clouds began to gather again, and the wind shifted in a way that suggested a storm was approaching. James noticed the change immediately and urged the girl to move quickly. "We should find shelter," he said, his voice calm but urgent. She nodded, scanning the area for a suitable place. They spotted a cluster of trees near a rocky outcrop and guided the horse toward it, hoping the natural formation would offer some protection from the wind and rain. As they took cover, the first drops of rain began to fall. The girl shivered slightly, and James offered his coat once more. She accepted it, grateful for the warmth. The rain intensified, turning the trail into a slippery path of mud and puddles. They stayed under the trees, waiting for the storm to pass, listening to the rhythmic sound of water falling on leaves and rocks. It was a tense, quiet time, but also a moment that strengthened their bond. The girl realized that James was dependable, someone she could rely on when circumstances became difficult. Once the storm had passed, they continued their journey with renewed caution. The ground was muddy and the horse struggled to maintain footing, but both James and the girl navigated carefully, learning to anticipate the challenges ahead. The girl spoke more freely now, sharing memories of her people, her family, and the traditions that had shaped her life. James listened attentively, offering his own experiences in return, creating a small bridge between their worlds. As evening approached, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. The sun was low, casting long shadows and bathing the landscape in golden light. They stopped to rest, letting the horse graze and taking a moment to enjoy the view. The valley below was vast and empty, a reminder of both the beauty and the danger of the land they were crossing. James spoke softly about the towns and safe places they might find along the way, giving the girl a sense of direction and hope. The girl watched him carefully, her mind weighing each word. She was beginning to see James not only as a guide, but also as a companion, someone who could navigate the unknown with skill and kindness. She had been taught to rely on herself, to trust only her own instincts, but now she realized that there could be strength in allowing someone else to share the burden. It was a new and unfamiliar feeling, but one she was beginning to accept. Night fell quickly in the valley, and the temperature dropped. They found a small cave in the rocky hillside, enough to shelter them and the horse. James made a small fire using dry kindling and stones, the flames providing warmth and light. The girl sat quietly, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. She felt a mixture of relief, caution, and curiosity, a blend of emotions she had rarely experienced. James offered her some of the food he had saved, and they ate in silence, the crackling fire the only sound around them. As the night deepened, James spoke softly about the journey ahead. He did not speak of dangers to frighten her, but of the importance of caution, observation, and patience. The girl listened carefully, absorbing his words and considering their meaning. She realized that he was not only guiding her through the physical challenges of the trail, but also helping her navigate the emotional and mental uncertainties that came with travel in a vast, unpredictable land. Before they slept, the girl spoke quietly. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere, "for helping me, for being here." James nodded, offering a gentle smile. "We look out for each other," he replied. "That's what matters." The words were simple, but they carried weight, a quiet acknowledgement of the trust that had grown between them. As they lay near the fire, the girl felt a sense of calm she had not known in a long time. She was still cautious, still aware of the dangers that surrounded them, but for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. The journey was far from over, and challenges would continue to arise, but she realized that with James by her side, she might find strength she did not know she possessed. In the quiet of the night, with the fire casting long shadows on the cave walls, the bond between them deepened. They were two travelers in a wild and unpredictable world, learning to trust, to rely on each other, and to face the unknown together. The challenges they had faced so far had tested their courage, patience, and judgment, but they had also revealed their strengths and resilience. And as they drifted into sleep, the girl and the cowboy understood that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, dangers, and difficult choices, but they had already proven that together they could navigate even the harshest terrain. The frontier was vast and unpredictable, but in each other they had found companionship, respect, and the quiet beginnings of trust, a foundation strong enough to carry them through whatever lay ahead. The morning sun rose slowly over the distant hills, casting a golden glow across the valley where James and the Apache girl had spent the night. The fire had burned down to embers, leaving only warmth and the faint scent of smoke lingering in the cave. They packed their belongings carefully, preparing to continue their journey. Today felt different from the others, as if the land itself recognized the progress they had made, not just in distance, but in understanding and trust. The girl mounted the horse with quiet confidence, adjusting the coat James had given her. She had grown more comfortable with him over the past days, learning that his patience, kindness, and steady presence were as reliable as any guidance through the wilderness. James watched her carefully, ensuring that she was ready, and felt a sense of pride. This journey had tested them both, but they had grown stronger together, learning to rely on each other without words needing to be forced. The trail ahead led through a narrow canyon, the rocky walls rising on either side. The air was cooler here, shaded by the cliffs and the occasional tree growing in the cracks of the rocks. They moved cautiously, aware that the canyon could hide dangers, but the girl's confidence had increased. She guided the horse with skill, listening to its soft movements and responding quickly when the terrain shifted beneath them. James rode beside her, offering gentle advice when needed, but mostly allowing her to take the lead. As they emerged from the canyon, they were greeted by a wide open plain stretching toward a distant settlement. Smoke rose from chimneys and the faint sounds of people moving about carried through the morning air. The sight brought relief, but also a strange sense of hesitation. The girl had never been far from her family before, and the idea of entering a town without the protection of her group was daunting. James noticed the hesitation in her posture and slowed the horse. "We can take it slowly," he said softly. "No need to rush." They rode down the gentle slope, approaching the settlement carefully. People moved about in the streets, tending to daily chores, loading wagons and speaking with one another. The girl kept her eyes forward, her hand lightly brushing the horse's mane as she navigated the unfamiliar world. James stayed close, guiding her to a stable and helping them secure the horse. The routine actions felt small but significant. Another step in the journey, another moment of trust solidified. Once the horse was settled, James led the girl to a small inn near the center of the town. The innkeeper, a friendly woman with a warm smile, welcomed them, offering food and rooms. The girl glanced around cautiously, her instincts still alert, but she allowed herself to relax slightly. She realized that this was not just a place to rest. It was a symbol of progress, a reminder that the world could be kind and welcoming even to those who had traveled far and faced hardships. During their meal, James and the girl spoke more openly than they had before. The girl shared stories of her childhood, of her family's travels, and of the lessons she had learned from her people. James listened attentively, occasionally sharing tales of his own life on the frontier, the ranches he had worked on, and the people he had met along the way. The exchange was more than conversation. It was a weaving together of experiences, a bridge between two worlds that had rarely intersected before. After the meal, they walked through the settlement, exploring the small shops and observing the daily life of the townspeople. The girl's curiosity grew as she saw new tools, animals, and faces, each one telling a story she had never encountered. James watched her with quiet admiration, recognizing the spark of wonder in her eyes. He understood that this journey had been more than a physical passage through the wilderness. It had been a journey of discovery, trust, and the quiet growth of understanding between them. As evening approached, they found a quiet spot near the river that ran through the town. The water reflected the colors of the sunset, rippling gently in the breeze. They sat together on a large rock, their shoulders brushing lightly as they watched the water flow. The girl spoke softly, reflecting on the days they had spent traveling. "I was afraid at first," she said, her voice calm but thoughtful. "I didn't know if I could trust anyone outside my family." James nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Trust is hard," he replied, "but sometimes it's worth taking the chance." He looked at her with a gentle expression, conveying respect, care, and honesty. She met his gaze, seeing the truth in his eyes. For the first time in her life, she realized that trust could be chosen, shared, and built, even in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. The night fell quietly over the settlement, stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. Now, the girl and James returned to the inn, where they found rooms to rest. That night, they spoke quietly of the future, not of distant lands or impossible plans, but of simple hopes, safe travels, the opportunity to learn, and the possibility of connection. There was no rush, no pressure, only the understanding that their journey together had created a bond neither of them had expected. The next morning brought a new decision. The girl could continue with James, learning more about the frontier and traveling safely, or she could choose to return to her family, bringing the lessons and trust she had gained. She thought carefully, weighing the comfort of independence against the opportunity to explore, grow, and rely on someone who had proven his reliability. James gave her space to decide, knowing that the choice must be hers alone. After a long pause, she looked at him with quiet determination. "I want to continue," she said. Her voice was steady, free of fear. "I want to see more, to learn, and to travel safely with someone I can trust." James smiled, relief and pride shining in his expression. "Then we'll travel together," he said simply. "No rush, no pressure, just one step at a time." Their journey continued over the following days, each mile bringing new experiences and challenges. They encountered small towns, friendly travelers, and the occasional obstacle, but they faced each together. The girl grew more confident, navigating difficult terrain with skill and insight. James remained patient, offering guidance and support without diminishing her independence. With each passing day, their bond strengthened, built on respect, trust, and the quiet understanding that they were no longer alone. One evening, as they camped beneath the stars on a hill overlooking the plains, the girl reflected on the journey they had shared. She realized that the frontier was not just a place of danger and unpredictability, it was also a place of growth, connection, and discovery. She had learned to trust, to rely on someone without losing herself, and to find strength in shared experience. James had learned patience, empathy, and the power of companionship, discovering that even the loneliest of hearts could find connection in unexpected places. The next morning, they rode toward a larger town where the girl would have the opportunity to meet her family again. The reunion was quiet and respectful, filled with gratitude and understanding. Her family recognized the growth in her confidence and independence, and they welcomed James not only as a guide, but as someone who had earned their respect. It was a moment of closure and new beginnings, a reminder that journeys can change not only where you go, but who you become. As they prepared to leave the town, the girl turned to James, a small smile on her lips. "Ah, thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying warmth and sincerity. James tipped his hat, returning the smile. "We did it together," he replied, "and the journey isn't over yet." They rode off side by side, the horizon stretching wide and full of promise before them. The frontier lay ahead, vast, unpredictable, and full of life, but neither of them faced it alone anymore. They had discovered courage, trust, and the quiet strength that comes from shared experience. And in that knowledge, they found not only safety and companionship, but also the possibility of hope, understanding, and the lasting bonds that make any journey worth taking.